When was the last time you paused to reflect on your life as an international educator? What lessons have you learned so far, both in the classroom and from your experiences living overseas? Hi, and welcome to Educators Going Global, where we invite aspiring and veteran international educators to expand their knowledge of all things related to international education. My name is Audrey. My co-host David and I bring almost 50 years of combined experience teaching overseas to the table. Whether or not you've taken the time to look back on your overseas teaching life so far, you're sure to gain some insights and ideas from this two-part conversation with the wise, thoughtful, uber-intentional David Carpenter as he reflects on his life, experiences, and lessons learned in his extensive foray into international education. Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Educators Going Global, and we have a very special guest with us today who has many years of international education experience behind him. Yes, it's my co-host, David Carpenter. Welcome to the show, Carpy. How are you doing?
I'm glad to be here. I feel like I've been here before. I don't know why.
Very familiar.
Yes.
Oh, well, so let's start off by finding out where in the world you are. Tell us.
All righty. So I continue to be in Bangkok, Thailand, even though I'm going to do a little day trip in the next day or two. I'm really excited. I've got a couple trips coming up. One to see my son Sam in Idaho over the winter holiday. And then in the spring, you've heard his name before, Maxwell Carpenter. I'm going to see my Roman son. So that's kind of where I am and where I'm going.
Is he roaming the globe or?
He's Roman as in Rome, Italy, and looking like a god, if you ask me.
No doubt it's all that beautifully long flowing hair he's got going on.
Yes. The kid is taking care of himself physically, spiritually. He's like a Roman god, my Maxwell. And so is Sam. Both the boys work out, eat well, all that good stuff.
Well, they've had a great role model. So there you go.
Yeah.
Have you got a going global story for us today?
Well, I thought I would go all the way back to the start. A lot of our guests do that. And my start was I was at my college outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, wonderful college, Davidson College. And I didn't want to go the way so many of my compatriots were going, a lot of lawyers, doctors, bankers, all that good stuff. I wanted to be a teacher, even though I wasn't in the education program. And I found this kind of travel magazine, and there was an ad in it for going overseas, going global. And I said, I want to check this out. Yes. So I recorded the information, stuck it in a file someplace. And then when I finished there, I took some classes, got certified, became a teacher, and then began the process of looking as an American through the Defense Department job route or the international school. And the international school really rang true for me because much more enmeshed in the local culture than living on an American military base. So I pursued that, got my first job, went to Israel, 1990, and there was a little skirmish going on called the First Gulf War. They didn't call it the first.
Skirmish.
Right. Just like you, we ended up both in places of strife and war and all that. So I got my start at the Walworth Barber American International School, and from there launched a career. So that's my initial going global story.
And you've been continuing to stay global pretty much ever since. You had some stints back in the US, but by and large, you've been continuing with it as a wanderer.
Just a nomad,
Yeah.
part-time podcaster.
Yeah.
That's it.
Wonderful. So to organize the show, we have a guiding question. In those years of being an international educator, I can imagine you've learned just a few lessons. So that's our guiding question. What are some of your lessons learned as an international educator? And we've broken it down. You've organized it by categories. So let's start with how you documented and reflected on all the lessons you were learning, what your process was for taking stock over the years as an international educator. And then we'll move into the various categories of the lessons. So first of all, how did you document and reflect on your learnings? And looks like your first one is you have some tools that you've used. Tell us about those.
Yes, and I'm going to do a quick add on to this that my two hopes for this interview are that one, this process is something that makes sense to people who are very busy and haven't thought about, well, how am I doing as an international educator professionally and in my life outside of school? And what have I been learning? And then back to the first part, what are the methods to help me reflect and help me document and help me understand more about myself as a human being, specifically as an international educator? So let me go over that process a little bit. And as listeners know, I'm a pretty structured guy and I like building frameworks and strategies and such. So my platform, my approach, all the way back in the early 2000s, when I got started, was to start a blog. But in time, I just had a website, and for each post, I would have a different page. And I eventually, in time, would find a blogging platform. And guess what I named it? Lessons Learned.
Woohoo.
Yeah, so that kind of fits to today's show. And another thing that I created online, a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but in the early 2000s, I think some people were starting online portfolios. So I did that. And then, as we've discussed before, Jeff Utecht and I started a podcast 2008, 2009. And so those were kind of my methods for communicating, for recording my learning. And another framework I used, here it is, folks, for the 20th time, is
Only the
the
20th?
PERMA 20th, 21st, the PERMA and character strength approach to wellness. And what I did, this was several years ago, I started a Google Doc with a table in it where every 3, 6, and 9 months, I'd look into it and go under each of the PERMA pillars where I'd list activities, things I was doing to support each of those pillars and the character strengths I was exercising. So those were all my various tools. Several of them are probably, well, mainly blogs are dated now. I don't even know if people are still doing them. So one thing I did want to share, probably a lot of folks are hearing about Substack, and a lot of people in the news business and artists and writers have moved to that platform. So I offer that as one place where you could record your learning and communicate it. It has multimedia capabilities and it's free to set up. So I share that. One of the helpful tools in blogging, though, and I don't know if Substack has this, is the tagging system. And that might be something that our very young listeners, people in their 20s, well, I guess people use it now for Instagram and other things like that, hashtag, all that good stuff, is that when you tag your entries into a blog or maybe whatever your current documentation tool is, that's a natural way to bring in, like, let's say we're going to do the category recruiting in just a second, to look at all your inputs on recruiting to be able to reflect about them all at one time. So I would say, try to find a way to categorize your learning, which we do anyway. It's just a normal thing we do with students. So do it for yourself. Even
Can I just
before,
interrupt for 1 second?
yeah.
I just want to respond to that Zettelkasten is a method where you can do exactly that. So you are creating kind of a mind dump, a mind web, and then you tag it. You just put in little sort of mini thoughts. So if you're reading a book, you
Oh,
put in every time that something comes up that sort of you connect with, but you hashtag it, like you said, you tag it. And then later on, you can sort and resort by all kinds of different means to get back at those thoughts and then see the connections from, one book
wow.
you read to an experience you had to a conversation you had with somebody and so on, and just connect it all together. So Zettelkasten is something I would recommend. Also free.
That's massive. And later I'm going to talk about the oldies but goodies, some of the tools we used to use, maybe we still use, but that whole idea of mind mapping in the theory of connectivism, that takes it to another level. And I wonder, with the connecting lines or whatever form they take, can you add information that shows the connection between different data
Yep.
points or entries? Wow,
Yeah.
that is
There's all
fantastic.
kinds of,
All right.
yeah. They're like little cards. virtual little
Oh,
cards, and then you can, like library cards, you might say, and you can just tag them all with as many different tags as you want. And then, later you can call up the tags and up come all the connections.
wow. That sounds like a winner. And so for folks to take a look at that, and we'll add it to the show notes. So the last part of the process is something I've been doing from the start is personalizing my PD. And that's a term we use a lot with personalized learning for the students. Well, like a lot of things, we can apply them to ourselves as adults. The whole idea for me over the years was bringing in information from different formats, podcasts, videos, online courses, these things called books.
What
Yes,
what are those?
books.
What?
Yeah, books. And school provided PD, going to conference PD. But then the big part is just like this whole process I'm talking about is how do you document your learning? How do you reflect upon your learning and finding a platform that can help you do that? The one you're mentioning sounds perfect for just specific. You've attended a PD session and you come back and you use that tool to do so.
Yeah, so you tag it with the name of the PD session, maybe the date. You could tag it with I went to X presentation that was on the brain. And then this was to do with, feelings and so on and so on and so on. It's pretty comprehensive. So now let's pop into the categories of your learning, and you're going to share some of your gems of wisdom with folks. And so the first one that we have up is recruiting. So tell us some of your lessons learned on recruiting.
Well, one thing I can say, partner, that's helped me so much with my reflection about my life as an international educator is our podcast. That's brought many of those lessons learned into the present as we connect to the people we talk to. And so, what I would say to our listeners is start with our foundational series of podcasts dealing with recruiting and what international schools are like. And then throughout our podcast episode page are so many interviews on this topic. So, folks, take a look at that. Look at our resource library. There's so much there. So, one of the topics that's come up over the last year, I think, is whether to attend a conference or not. And clearly, because I've not recruited for many years, I cannot speak from personal experience. But what I can say from one recent person we interviewed who is heading up a recruiting agency, what he said is that his number of clients who want to attend conferences is pretty small. And then as we're recording this in November, just the previous month, I was on Reddit and saw a lot of people talking about a couple conferences in China. And they were noting there were very few actual interviews. It was just more schools out kind of promoting themselves. And then a couple weeks ago, I had a friend in town for a conference here in Bangkok. He had just attended a conference and we were getting together, and he was just saying there weren't many schools there and it was way too early for offers. So I don't know what's going to happen next as more and more schools, we're in November now, they're announcing their openings, what that is, but definitely do some researches, we always say, on whether it's worth attending a conference.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it's such a shame because I
Yes.
really feel that you get a much better sense of a person in person, and the opportunities in between interviews and in between presentations to just network, see people. It's such a wonderful, I think, particularly for people who are new to the whole thing, to just attend a virtual conference and only be talking to the people that you're getting interviews with. And I'm assuming they have sessions that they do as well, but it just sounds so much more limited. So I would say, personally, for people that are new, I still feel like going to the in person conferences have some merit just for those reasons that I said. And even if there aren't a lot of people there, you're still going to get a flavor. You still could meet some people who have been doing it for a while and can give you some, some input or, the networking. It's just so many things that happen at an in-person conference that I'm not sure how they replicate that with a virtual one. Now, I haven't attended any. That's just what I hear.
Excellent point. And we've got Greg Lemoyne's books on our resource site. Greg's a big fan of going to conferences for the reasons you've just shared. So folks can check those out as well. So one of the things I've learned more recently from our interviews and Max's, my son's, experience is it's worth hiring a consultant slash coach and to also design a recruiting plan. So these are very tangible things to do. And I'm really thinking it's like a team. You need a team approach where you could also work with one of these smaller recruiting agencies. Maybe some of the bigger ones offer very individualized service where you've got a consultant, you've got someone with a recruiting agency, maybe you've got a close friend who's your sounding board on emotional and other areas that you're contemplating about making the jump, for example. But really think about that, forming a team and getting some support. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, hire a life coach. Why not?
Yeah, well, that's the big one because I just wonder with these, I'll call them recruiting coaches, consultants. I don't think they have a background, at least the couple that we've got on the website, as life coaches. That's a different realm and different expertise. So people keep that in mind, especially when it comes down to making decisions and getting help with that. Right?
You betcha. And then the transition piece. I think
Oh,
it can be
gosh.
really helpful to have somebody supporting you and someone like myself who's done the transition how
Yeah.
many times,
Yeah.
I think can really provide some insights and mostly help you work through it. That's, the way a coach would work is to help you consider from different perspectives and really look at, what you value and what you're looking for in your move and how to make sure you tap into that.
Exactly. My message is just going to keep being educators. You deserve life coaches as well. So, folks, keep that in mind. So, one of the things, like I was saying at the beginning, one of my tools was I created a portfolio a long time ago, having a YouTube channel, putting together ways to communicate who you are as a person, who you are as an educator, I think are well worth it. I remember years ago, I've had a couple heads of school say, Dave, I saw your portfolio, I took a glance, and what really stands out at me is one, you know how to do it, but two, that you put in the time, you showed the initiative. So I had that in there. And it also shows that you have, well, as I was saying, the digital skills to make such a platform and communication skills, which are so important. Now, connecting to what you were just saying, working with a life coach and especially making decisions, a second lesson I would share is take a look at our blog post in our spreadsheet entitled Profiling Schools, Cities, and Countries. We talk a lot about this. We think it's one of our most helpful tools to help you decide what you want in your next school, in your next country, but also, almost just as importantly, your no-go criteria. What are certain things that aren't going to work for you where you're going? And we also did a whole episode on this with a panel.
Yeah, I really think that there's a lot of value in using, especially the spreadsheet, because we set up a point system in there, folks. You can check off the criteria that matter to you. You can input the schools, and then you can sort of score them based on your own criteria, and it totals your score. Now, you may end up going with your gut in the end, but it's nice to have that objective evaluation and just be able to kind of look at that and say, interesting. I wonder which of these schools is going to come out with the sort of the top score. So I
Mm-hmm.
highly recommend people just pop over to our website and check out that spreadsheet tool.
Definitely. So back to having a plan that includes your yes and your no criteria. If you're a teaching couple or you're a couple with a non-teaching partner, it's so important that you have within your recruiting plan how you're going to handle job offers, especially if you are a teaching couple. If it's the case where they only have a job for one of you, how are you going to handle that? Maybe ahead of time you just decide there's no way we're going to do that. Both of us have to have offers, or you might say there's some gray area. And then for the partner who's not the teacher, what is the partner's life going to be like in this place? Is it going to be a place where this person can thrive or not? Or potentially a school where they hire non-educators for non-teaching roles? Who knows? But I think that's something so important to work out ahead of time so that you have an agreement with your partner once those offers start coming in and you're feeling that pressure.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say there's been a couple of times in my recruiting life where the schools are going to want to try to perhaps encourage you to do something that maybe is a little different from what you had planned on doing. And for me, it really worked out well. When I was recruited for Saudi, they were asking me to be in elementary classroom. And I said, that's not really my forte. I really wanted the PE. And in the end, they decided they wanted us as a couple enough that that would be okay. In fact, they were trying to recruit Mark for the business office because he had the Wharton
Oh my.
degree. Yeah. But he held off and said, no, 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 I want to be a math teacher in the middle school. And so it ended up working out well for us. And then going to Senegal, I was asked to teach French and PE, but I had just really made the move big time into technology. And I said, I just really want to be in the tech area. And so then Alan Knobloch, who was interviewing us, said, well, what about film? That's got a lot of tech in it. So there's more wiggle room than you might think. And so like David said, have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you may end up going in goodness knows what direction. But if you have a plan, at least then you've got that as a fallback to say, what was I thinking about before I got into this high pressure interview / offer situation, and go back to your values and your preferences and the criteria that you had already identified, and not just forget about them in the heat of the moment, because that can happen too. Sometimes people just get excited. It's the first offer. They just jump at it. And like David said, just be mindful of that kind of situation.
Yes. So let me add in there, we're going to talk about followership a little bit later, and teachers is not wanting to make waves and sometimes not taking care of themselves as much as they should. So this topic's going to come up again. I'll mention that.
All right. So that topic was all about recruiting. Now, as soon as you've taken a job, of course, you're moving into the transition phase. So tell us some things that you've learned about transitioning.
My lesson learned is this is huge. This is such a massive topic for you if you
Yeah.
have children. It's for your family back in your home country. There's so many aspects to it. So this is one where I'm going to say I feel so good about our library resource site, what we've got there with some books. And then our interviews with Amy and Lena about the SPAN network. We did 2 shows about transitions and school ambassadors to help students, but it's also about the teachers coming in. It's about the families coming in with their children to the school. So this is such a huge topic. It's one really taking that deep dive on. I really am kind of reluctant to offer too many lessons, but I will add one. And you and I have spoken about this as well, like at Saudi. My earliest transition lesson was in 1990, mentioned my going to Israel. And the first thing I learned was I needed to find someone who could answer questions. And so people said, oh, for business questions, ask that person. For grocery questions, ask that person. And if things aren't working the way you want, oh man, you need the fixer. So that became embedded in my brain. These people have their areas of expertise, but then there was always like this one individual who was the fixer, who could just almost fix anything. So that's my one takeaway on transition from firsthand experience. Do you have a story like that?
Not a story per se. I just want to remind everybody about the RAFT acronym that comes
Oh,
from the
yeah.
original TCK book. And
Hmm.
so it's all about leaving well and then setting yourself up for success in the next destination. So reconcile any outstanding grievances, arguments, just situations that you will feel bad about if you get somewhere else and you've left that behind and it could eat away at you. So reconcile is first. Affirm. So just letting people know how much they've meant to you, how much you've enjoyed working with them, just affirming all those relationships. Then farewells. I've always felt that it's so important to say our farewells, and some people feel uncomfortable about it. I just end up pushing through and saying, I think it's so important. It feels like, for me, closure. It feels like validation as well of the relationship. Again, affirmation, but just taking the time, not just, okay, bye everybody, but really, individually seeking people out and affirming and saying your farewells, even if you might see them again. You just never know what's going to happen. And then the T is for think destination, which is like David talks about, doing that deep dive, doing the research, figuring out exactly, there's, as you've said before, there's travel YouTubes, there's Substack, there's Reddit, there's so many places you could go to investigate the place you're going to, the new school, and just kind of try to get the lay of the land the best you can so that you're not going in completely blank slate. And these are all things that can really help people to transition well. So remember the RAFT acronym.
Thanks for bringing that up, because if you think of some of the top nuggets that came out of those two interviews, that was one of the biggest ones. And I think your modeling, you've shared a few times about your openness to share emotions, where for many folks, they kind of want to run away from them, not realizing that. And this is what I don't like about PERMA, positive emotions. I don't like saying positive or negative. Sometimes we're going to have uncomfortable emotions, but that's life. And experiencing that loss and sharing that love for others in the moment is what makes us human. So don't run away.
Absolutely.
Go
Embrace
go
it.
for it.
Yep.
Oh, that's it. That's even better. Embrace it.
Well, see, I literally embrace people, so that's part of my thing too. Okay, so next topic, moving on, transitioning on to the next topic. What is all about raising children overseas. And David has a little Going Global story posted on the Going Global Stories page of our website. And they're also posted on our YouTube channel, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out our Going Global Stories on the YouTube channel, they're so much fun. We've got some amazing ones posted. Some are funny, some are just wacky, and some are informative, shall we say. So please head on over to our or our YouTube channel of Going Global Stories, or our website page that's got all the same Going Global Stories. And they're so much fun.
All right. So raising children overseas, and Audrey and I, both of us, two children, raised them overseas, and they've developed into incredible young people in their 20s now. And one of the things I say to people thinking about going overseas, probably the greatest benefit is how it will help your child grow and become just so much more than I think one can be. This might not sound great to folks, but just staying in one place and not have all the travel experiences, the opportunities in the classroom with just phenomenal teachers. And then in many cases, not always, but kids from all over the world. So it's just a wonderful way to go about raising children. And just as with transitions, this is such an important and emotionally focused topic that I would say, do your research and then design a guidebook. You and your partner, or if you're a single parent, put a guidebook together that differentiates how raising your child is overseas than if you're back in your home country. And that will help you go through your parenting and the different things that come up. Our resource library has several books on raising what we call third culture, or now we call them cross-cultural kids. So definitely take a look at those books. I do have some specific lessons learned, and they're both so obvious for veterans. They just know this, but for folks that haven't gone overseas, or maybe they've just started, I'll share them anyway, because hopefully they'll get you thinking a little bit. So many international schools have weekend activity programs. They can be sports focused, the arts, other curricular, co-curricular style opportunity for students, and sometimes even for parents. And so attending these events as a parent or as a volunteer, like as a coach, you get to meet other parents, especially those who aren't fellow teachers. And that's super cool to be able to do that. So my lesson learned is that even if you don't feel you have like a background for coaching or maybe teaching something new, look to volunteer, especially for these elementary school programs where the coaching expertise can be very low, and often they'll match you with a co-coach that has a lot of experience. So I, for example, co-coached soccer, which I knew nothing about. And then later when my sons joined a baseball team, there were so many parent coaches. I became the team videographer just as a way to engage and a way to help. So keep that in mind. The other thing that we've talked about a couple times is, folks, when you go overseas to teach, in most cases, your children are going to be on the same campus. There are some exceptions where there's maybe elementary campus in one geographical location and middle and high school someplace else, but it's the best. I mean, the idea that you can walk over and have lunch with your son or daughter and build memories, say hello to them out on the playground. When they're having a special activity in the classroom, get class coverage, go to it. And then, of course, there are the after school and nighttime events, the performances, the athletic events, the art shows, theater. It's just so wonderful to be there and have that much more time and rich experiences with your children. So what do you say, Audrey?
Well, you're reminding me of the wonderful days in Riyadh when we had that incredible daycare, even
Oh,
right from 6 weeks of age. The kids were in the daycare at school, and you could go down and, visit them, as you say. It was unreal. What a wonderful, wonderful benefit that was. So, the good old days. No, but you're so right. There's so many, often with these international schools, they are the hub of community life for a lot of the people that teach at the school. And like you said, you'll be at the school if you have a spouse that could likely be teaching at the school, your kids are attending the school. I mean, it just really becomes a big part of your life focus. And so being as much a part of it as you can, we strongly encourage. It's just the most amazing experience. Let's move on into, you alluded to this earlier, the idea of followership and leadership.
yes, two big topics, very connected. We are so fortunate to have Clara Gall as on our advisory board, and we've had her on the podcast a couple times. And she's written some blog posts for us, and one of them is on this topic of followership, which I really didn't think very much about. But Claire always gets me thinking about different perspectives and making connections. And that just tells me she's an awesome teacher, by the way, that she's able to do that with an old dude like me to get me thinking new ways. So one of the lessons that connects to followership that I think about, and I think I can get away with this generalization, sometimes I can't, is that teachers are such giving, selfless, and many times putting themselves second or third behind other people. So yes, we're in a helping profession, and sometimes our inclination kind of moves into compliance, which is fine, right? You want to be a good coworker. You want to work with your people on your team. Our goal is to serve students and their families, but sometimes it can go too far. So I would say to our listeners, definitely go read Claire's blog post and listen to that episode. And one of the things I brought up in it, because that interview really crystallized it for me, is kind of the shadow side of always being that good, supportive follower, whatever the leaders say, just kind of falling in line, is that, yes, we can go too far with that. And part of that is not setting healthy boundaries. And that's the big part of the healthcare world right now, is talking about setting good, healthy boundaries. We know that giving too much and not saying no, or not being able to say no, can lead to burnout. It can lead to a lot of uncomfortable feelings. So this is another one of those, duh, Dave, this is pretty obvious stuff, that teachers give too much and can get burnout. So my lesson learned is try this kind of process of really stepping out of yourself in situations where you're interacting with your teammates, you're interacting with a school leader, and have yourself thinking about how you're interacting. Our inclination is to do this sometime anyway, but go in with that in mind and say, I'm going to take the perspective of what does it look like when I'm interacting with people? Am I setting myself up that there's a sense of balance between following, taking care of myself, and having healthy boundaries? Or am I just saying yes and giving in and doing things that I really know aren't good for me, I might not believe in, especially in interacting with leadership and decisions that affect us?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a also resilience coach, in addition to transition coaching, that's something that I've really thought a lot about and worked on with people is setting those healthy boundaries and kind of, people think of self-care as selfish, and it isn't at all, because it's the whole, analogy of putting on your oxygen mask first so that you can help others more effectively. So if we look at it from that perspective, it really does matter that you set those boundaries and that you, yes, are a team player, and at the same time think about where's this team heading and does it make sense, and should we really maybe take stock and reconsider what we're doing instead of just jumping in blindly. So I appreciate that perspective.
And for you, bringing that life coach angle is definitely another reminder for our listeners to think about getting support. Don't feel like you're alone, hopefully, or if you have a partner, you can lean on that person, but get that outside support. So, a second lesson, and this one's just my natural desire to engage with people, is at almost all my schools, I try to engage with leaders, try to connect with them, find out what they're interested in, build a personal relationship. This is another one of those kind of, duh, Dave, don't we all do that? No, I know a lot of people I've
No.
worked with. Yeah, they talk about leadership as they, and boy, that just drives me crazy. They, and I kind of go, and it's kind of where we are and a little bit in the world right now, this divide, right? So what I would offer as a lesson learned is to not just see your leadership team, whoever you're working with, to see them as someone you're going to meet with when you're having struggles or you're having problems. Look to find ways to engage with them and getting just to know them. And one of the things we've learned from our interviews is that school leaders can sometimes feel isolated. And there's a tendency there to keep a distance between themselves and staff. So find a way to support those who are always there to support you.
Absolutely. And as David mentioned, we've had several interviews with people who are leaders, and it's really, it's a special relationship that you have because it's an international school. If you were in, say, a public school in the US anyway, that I, have familiarity with, or Canada, the admin just feel like a different group. They're not part of someone you would necessarily socialize with. But that's a difference that we find overseas, is that, like I said, the community is built around the school. And so you do get more opportunities to get to know those people on a more personal level. So I think that's a great bit of advice. Let's move into a different category of learning, of lessons learned, which would be instruction and professional development. What have you got to say about those?
One of the things that we've shared on the show is that Audrey and I have worn many hats in our careers, and one of mine has been as an instructional technologist, which I think is a very, very important position. And I think now they're called instructional coaches for technology, or hopefully instructional coaches for learning. I always kind of moved away from technology and just said, I'm an instructional coach for learning. That was always my focus, less about the tools, more about the pedagogy and such. So one of the realities, though, is I've been out of the biz for a while when it comes to what's happening with new instructional and assessment strategies and models. So I can't speak specifically about what's happening right now, but I do have some lessons from all those years working as an instructional technologist. And one of the things I can say that's come up again with our interviews is new international teachers that we've talked with on mic and then just in our previous schools is they go, whoa, the PD it's so incredible, and the opportunities for mentoring, and I'm becoming such a better teacher. It's so wonderful. And that, I think, is something that runs through many international schools and what they offer. So I'll share a little bit about PD. And we've had some PD providers and some thought leaders on the podcast sharing about that, like Greg Mancata, for example, Justin Hardman, among others. So take a listen. All right. So one of the things that I would say it's very practical about your professional learning, your instructional practices is find ways to document and reflect about the learning of your craft. And this connects to our start, having possibly a blog, a podcast, another platform for documentation. And this also gets into something I won't really talk about, but is branding, that you start putting your name out there as someone who knows something about your discipline, as someone that people might look to. That's just a little side add-on. But so important with our students is we build in ways for them to document and reflect. So we need to do it ourselves. And then we follow up with action. How does all this learning change what happens in our classroom? So one of the big criticisms, and I think Audrey would agree with this, we've spoken about it, is over the years in plenty of my schools, there was a lot of money spent on bringing in keynote speakers and sending staff off to conferences without providing a mechanism or time to have staff process that learning and then apply it to their teaching. Just the follow-up so often wasn't there. And I think that was a fair criticism. And one of the things I keep picking up on now is more and more of these consultants and coaches are coming in for a week at a time, that they're giving the presentation, the workshop, hopefully it's more workshop than presentation, and then they're working with the teams. So that's really good to hear. But I'll bring it back to you that as an instructor, you personalize your learning. You find ways to build a menu of not only depending upon your school to bring PD in, but like so many teachers do. They take online courses, they're reading books, they're listening to podcasts, they've got YouTube channels. So build that personal professional learning menu for yourself. A very practical lesson learned is, and I say this to Max, I remind him, whatever you're putting up on your school learning management system or your Google Drive or whatever school learning platform, make a copy of it to go into your personal storage platform. So whenever you create it, one copy goes for the consumption of your students, and then another copy goes into your personal storage area. Do not wait until you're leaving school. It's obviously a time of too much going on. You're going to not get it all transferred over. Another obvious thing, there are so many tried and true instructional methods and platforms that sometimes get lost when schools are bringing in new approaches that they're trying to bring on board. And one of the big ones we had Jim Reese on is all the pedagogy and the frameworks in the Harvard School of Education Project Zero Toolkit. So I just remind people that is out there. It might have been something that you worked with in the past, but don't forget these tried and true ones. One that's really warmed my heart is the Universal Design for Learning, UDL. My co-host on the EdTech Co-Op podcast, Dr. Mark Hofer, would often bring up UDL as a discussion point, and this was a long time ago, so it's wonderful to see folks talking about it now. As an approach to support students with special learning needs. But one of the things we talked about was it really helps all students and how you present information in different formats and then giving them different methods, different formats to show their learning. And it really fits with individualization and differentiation and helps all students. So I'm so glad to see that oldie but goodie people are diving into it. So that's pretty awesome.
Remember Lori Bowl when we interviewed her about Senya, and that was one of the things she really highlighted is that the differentiation that can work for special needs kids can work for all learners, and so it's all helpful.
Yes, definitely. And then my last thing, speaking about kind of initiative fatigue where schools are trying to do too much, one of the themes, Audrey, and I think you've probably picked up on this in our last several podcast interviews, is that first, schools need to limit the initiatives. That's just a given. You just can't try to do everything. You've got to have like a 5-year plan, something like that. But when you're bringing in new programming, look at what can complement what you already have in place, unless it's just something you desperately need. And then a second aspect of this is for schools to audit what they're already doing within that new program possibility. What's already working? And then when you're thinking about designing that new program, start working with what's already in place.
David, it's, like the old Far Side cartoon used to say, Mr. Smith, can I be excused, please? My brain is full. So I'm feeling pretty filled up here with so many great suggestions. I hope folks have been taking notes and that you will really take some of these to heart. David is just such a sharing person, and he's got so much experience, and he's such a planner and a thinker, ideator. So really, really hope that you will take some of these to heart and put them into practice in your own lives as you glide on through the international education experience. And we're going to have David back on for another show, but I really want to thank you, David, for taking the time and for sharing so much of your nuggets of wisdom with us. Thank you.
Cheers, my partner. Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
and David,
inviting you to travel,
teach,
and connect with us.